Guys, this is Zach coming at you with live at 7:45. We're going to continue on talking about faithfulness this month. I hope you guys are doing well and have a great day today. So we're just going to dive straight into it. I feel like the Lord kind of dropped something in my spirit a few days ago about the saying in the Old Testament. It's that I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I know the Old Testament isn't always the most exciting part of the Bible to read, and there are parts of it that can be kind of hard to understand or old school or hard, just kind of weird. But this saying actually occurs a lot in the Old Testament. God says it through His prophets to His people, and even some of the people I think have said it, remembering or reminding themselves of who God is. It says, "I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And the reason that's significant is that because God made some pretty awesome promises to Abraham. He promised him a son when he's about 100 years old. His wife's about 90, and his wife had been barren. They've been able to have kids for a long time, I would imagine. And God promises him a son, and lo and behold, a year later, he has a son. Um, God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son to him later in his life, and Abraham is starting to comply and all this stuff. And it's like, God, you made all these promises to me because through that son, God had promised him, that he would birth a nation and all this supernatural, like crazy growth stuff that you would think. And here God is telling him to basically kill a dream, and God provides something instead. And then there's all these other stories through Abraham's life and through Isaac and Jacob having 12 sons that end up going to Egypt and being provided for and cared for. And eventually the Egyptians take them as slaves, and eventually God gets them out of Egypt. They cross the Red Sea, go into become the nation of Israel. And, all this crazy stuff that happens. And that's like a really quick, several hundred-year version of the history of Israel. But when God does all that, and then he says, "I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," it's supposed to serve as a reminder to his people that he's the God that makes those promises, and he's the God that fulfills those promises. And so I think another interesting thing that happens a lot in the Old Testament is that people built altars as reminders when God provided something for them. Jacob built an altar after he wrestled with God, and there are other examples. I think David probably built some, and there's some other people, but the whole idea is that when God did something significant in their lives or provided something for them or some kind of breakthrough, they had built an altar to remind themselves of what God had done. And I think it's important for us to do that because the Bible says in the New Testament that God is the same, yesterday, today, and forever, that Jesus is the same. And, in Revelation, God says that he's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And, all these big things about who God is, and he never changes. And yet a lot of times I think it's easy for us to forget that he's that God that is faithful. He's that God that does provide. He's the God that brought Israel across the Red Sea on dry ground. Desiree and I have a story that we haven't really told to a ton of people. But when Emory was still in Desiree's womb, we went for kind of a routine test, and the result of the test came back not so routine. And they told us that there was a condition with the umbilical cord that attached Emory to Desiree, and that it could cause issues with Emory once she was born with like her heart, her spine, or her kidneys, and some of the major organs. And so I think we both still remember that day pretty vividly, sitting in that doctor's office, kind of thinking, okay, we'll finish this and then go on to work or lunch or whatever that day would have been. And then we get that news, and all of a sudden we were just like, shocked and dumbfounded and just couldn't believe it. And so we started praying, God, please, heal our girl. Don't let any of this stuff they're saying could happen. And fast forwarding, we had several months of appointments and checkups on that and things like that. And Emery's born perfectly healthy. God provided for her. But what's funny about that is that now there are situations that might pop up in my life that aren't nearly as serious. And when they pop up, my first thought isn't, oh, well, God took care of that situation with Emery, 2 years ago. He's going to take care of this. My thought is, how can I fix it? And so I think it's important for all of us, to take time to remember the things that God's done in our lives, to build those altars up so that you have a point to look back on, because it's easy to kind of gloss over things that have happened in our lives. But, from the small to the big, maybe you were broke one day and hungry and somebody bought you lunch and covered you. Maybe you thought your parents were getting a divorce and they didn't. Maybe you were praying for healing for a grandparent or a relative, and they ended up getting healed. It's important for us to take time to go back and remember those things that God has done. So I want to encourage you guys, take a few minutes today. If it's 3 minutes on the bus, or if you're already at school, between classes at some point, find yourself a few minutes where you can sit down and really think about some of the times that God has provided for you, because you may not always have things turn out the way you would want or the way you would initially desire. But it's important to go back and remember, God's provided for us in this case. God provided this job, or God provided the finances for me to pay for college, or this semester, or kept my parents together, whatever the case may be. But go back and set up those altars. Remember, He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God who provided then, and He's the same God yesterday, today, and forever. And He's the same God that'll provide for you guys today, and for your families. And so, hopefully, that's encouraging to you and encouraging to me too. Like I said, it's a reminder to go back and remember some of the things God has done in our lives. He is faithful, He is good, and He loves us and likes to take care of His children. And it's important for us to remember that and not treat every time something comes up as like an audition for God to see if He can do it. He's provided for us time and time again. Let's not forget that, and let's count on that and know that He's able to do it. We've seen Him do it, and we know that He can do it again. So I'll leave you guys with that. Hope you'll have a great day and a great rest of the week, and we'll see y'all next week.